Well, thank you very much for inviting me to come here. It's a great pleasure, and it's always difficult to go last because you hear great presentations before you, and it's like, what else can I say? I'll do my best. There is, as you said, overlaps and stuff like that, so I will try to skip anything that's been covered before. And feel free to stop me if you have questions as we go along as well. Good start. All right. And I'm going to tell it from a US perspective, so this doesn't necessarily apply to Spain or other places, and especially listening to some of you the last couple of days about how valuations are kind of newer here than they are in the US and some other places. But it's a really big issue in North America and some other places where decisions are made on things like tenure, and tenure in the US is a very big deal. If you get tenure, it's like a lifetime membership for the most part, and you really only get fired if, for example, when you do something unethical, illegal, or somehow your classes, you can't attract students anymore. Also promotion, the assistant, associate, full professor, as well as merit pay every year, which is very competitive, and in higher education, as you know, is very different to a business model where, if you do well in the business, you typically get some kind of reward. If the profits go up, usually your salary will go up. But in higher education, it's not like that. So everyone's fighting for so few amount of money, dollars, etc. And so it's very, very. So creating an instrument that's to measure teaching is very, very important, because you don't want to have a situation where teachers are really good, but it's not reflected by the evaluations, and then they end up not getting the reward they deserve. And at least in theory, it should help faculty members give information to improve their teaching. Okay, everyone hear me at the back? Yeah. Everyone understand me? Yeah. Okay. So we talked about formative and summative, so I won't say much more about that, where you use it ongoingly in a formative way, but at the end, towards the end of your course. And it's an indicator of accountability in many institutions, as I said. And the assumption, of course, is that the responses that you get from our students are both reliable and valid. So the question is that a good assumption? I could skip this now because both of them talked about this, and I didn't know about 1950. That's nice to know the 100th year this year, and but in the 80s, pretty consistent what you have up there, where 80s was a really big period for research in that area. All right, so it was in general, the whole goal of it was to improve faculty teaching. It was formative. You take what the students tell you, and then you make modifications to your teaching that will improve your teaching, improve their learning. But over the years, it's kind of transitioned into being, for some, punitive. I've seen some of my colleagues not get tenure, which means if you don't get tenure, you have to leave, usually within a year, because of their teaching. Because they're teaching, not teaching, because they're teaching evaluations. Yet no one has ever seen them teach other than the students, and you rely on oftentimes numbers to determine somebody's fate, which, that's scary. So rating, ratings are used usually Likert type scales or rating scales, and the decisions, as I said, are made based on them. So, as has been eloquently shown today, if you have a teaching instrument that is well designed, has the psychometric properties, then it could be, of course, a useful indicator. But the question is, what does it take to have an instrument, to design an instrument that has psychometric properties? Okay, that's a question that's still out there. And so the teaching instruments are predominantly quantitative. Okay, in some places exclusively quantitative. Even institutions that have an open-ended system, they're often ignored, or they don't play any role whatsoever. And as somebody in my field who's a big mixed methods person who believes in the power of both quantitative and qualitative, that concerns me a lot. That we have this rich qualitative data that we get from our students, the ones who complete it. Now, one of you said you don't complete the box. Was it you that said you don't complete the box? But I was, that's for those who do, that's throwing away good information when we don't factor it in. It's the numbers, as I said, that are given the most weight, and yet grade inflation, both doctors here have mentioned that, and but it may not be optimal to help improve teaching as well, which is another issue. So it's very much subject to abuse and misuse, and there are some information that you need to be able to interpret them adequately. Those statistics courses you've taken or the measurement courses you've taken that some of our administrators have not taken, or a long time ago they took them. Well, it could, it could be really, really problematic if, for example, you don't know the concepts of confidence intervals and point estimates being, a 4.9 on a 5-point scale versus a 4.8. That to be able to say that 4.9 is better than 4.8 is not, based on standard deviation, is not an accurate statement. And so, let's skip that slide there. There are some limitations, quite a few limitations, some of which are fixable, some of which are more challenging. So administration procedures, that's fixable. So you have, instructions given. If you give instructions, timing of when you do it. So if you, for example, give an instrument, ask students to fill it in just before they're taking an examination, or just before they're turning in their last project, that might not be a good time. And there's, Ray talks about it being the only indicator, using it the only indicator is problematic. Then you have the fact that you hear some people say, they'll compare to other people in the department, and yet overlook the fact that 50% are always going to appear below the median. I mean, it's a basic fact, but sometimes you hear people interpreting it as if that's, everybody should go above the median somehow, which would be great. Reliability and validity are two components, at least in the classical test theory world, and we haven't even mentioned item response theory. That's another talk. But today we're going to talk about classical test theory. And so, many studies do show that you have high score reliability. It was interesting to see you had, 0.6 to 0.8? Anyone? One of you actually, 0.6 to 0.8 across time. But you have some, even with that, you have some assumptions. I don't know if you've taken the measurement class, you may have heard the concept of tau equivalence. Don't know if you haven't. But the fact that that's hard to get anyway in many contexts, particularly hard in teaching, where you've got different behaviors that could be very different. So if you try to measure it in a common scale or a metric, it's going to be a problem. You've got multiple sources of measurement error. Some of them are quite difficult to identify, although the body of research is starting to identify more and more sources of error. They're separate and it's cumulative, and there's interaction effects. And so the same student might rate the same professor differently at different times. Okay? So coefficient alpha, even the use of that could be problematic. Okay, so something for us to think about as those who design tests. But even if we can show that, first of all, score reliability is a good indicator for instruments of teacher effectiveness, and on top of that, it yields reliable scores. It still doesn't necessarily mean that it's valid. Okay, you think of the idea that you could throw, if you have a dartboard, example I like to use, you throw 3 darts at the dartboard, and you never get the center, you always get the edge, or 3 of your darts hit the edge. You've got reliability, you haven't got validity. Okay? a model you refer to, the meta-validation model, where you look at using MESIC. It's a really big name in the field, as you might have heard of. There's some great work on validity. If that's an interest of yours, when you're familiar with MESIC, I would recommend you read his work. And from there, kind of broke down the idea, the concept of validity is not being, even though it's a unitary concept, it has aspects, it has dimensions within it. And you may have heard of the three major C's: criterion, content, and constructs related validity. And each of those have their own, types. Are you familiar with this? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So I could skip on to here, and that's what it might look like. So from there, and this is, having used some of the more recent ones that you have done, but you did say that you had some similarities. So concurrent and predictive is strong in the literature. Okay, so you look at the literature and you find that typically high scores in teacher evaluations predict things quite well, both in the future, i.e. predictive, and concurrently. And then you have phase validity, those who design it well, which might have some, it looks like a test, it has the components of a test, it has items that are, not too distracting and so forth. But much of the other evidence is either inadequate or weak. A big one, or big two there, are the item and sampling validity. So in the item one, I've seen test item, I keep saying test item, I've seen evaluation items like the textbook was really good. Okay? Those who teach quantitative methods, what's the chances that someone who's not in that field is going to say the textbook was really enjoyable? Okay? And does that mean I'm a bad teacher? Because if I've chosen a classic textbook that many people in the community agree is a good textbook, but the students happen to find it boring or not like it, does that mean I'm a bad teacher? Okay, you could question that. We were talking in the car about, there's a question that's often asked of the professor, the instructor is knowledgeable. Well, for some courses that might be okay. But again, some of these more complex courses that students find more complex, like quantitative methods, or higher level courses, I was questioning whether the students, how would they know that? Just as you show in that Dr. Fox demonstration, I can stand up here and use a few fancy terms and look as if I know what I'm talking about, like I'm doing now, but end up not knowing. And the students say, oh, he really knows a lot. Okay? So that's really, really a problematic item. I've had people talk about speaking good English. That is a problematic item. In fact, one of my colleagues, Collins, who you saw her name there earlier, she gets rated badly because she is from the north. She has a New York accent, teaches in the south, Arkansas. Might not mean as much to you, you've not been there, but the accents are so different. And she gets penalized because of that. They'll say, oh, her accent is not good. And so, again, does that mean she's a bad teacher? As long as she's understandable, it doesn't matter what accent you have. So those examples there of either item related and sampling, does it cover the whole domain? And this is something we need to work on. Can someone tell me their favorite theory in psychology? Any theory comes to your head? Don't be shy. Tell me a psychological theory. So you've been so quiet, so I'm not letting you guys off the hook. So tell me a psychological theory that comes to your head. There's hundreds of them. You're shy?
Maybe terror management theory?
Sorry?
Terror management theory?
Okay, I don't even know what that is. So what can you explain to me what that is?
Really briefly?
Yes.
It is whenever you threaten people with death, or when you remind them of their own death, then they typically hold on to their principles and be really conservative if you ask them about political change or whatever.
Okay, is that well established? Did you say?
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Any others? Good, thank you. I learned something today, you see. Swap places later. Yeah, any others? Come on, what's some of the classic psychological theories?
Conductism.
I'm sorry?
Conductism.
Okay. Can you explain what that is, please?
That's basically that reinforcements and punishments and things associated with our conduct determine them.
Okay. Is that well established?
I'd say so.
Okay. So we have, some of the theories I think some of you would say, in psychology, Bandura and those kind of theories out there, Vygotsky, and so learning theories, psychology theories, educational theories. But there are lots out there, and a lot of them have stood the test of time. So why can't we come up with some teaching theory, which has always baffled me, because as you know, without a theory, it's very difficult to create instruments that across, at least across an institution, if not beyond. So it's something we need to kind of really try to work out. I don't know if you have an answer for that. I'd be interested to hear you, because you're very familiar with literature more than I am. But I'd be interested to see why that's the case, why it's not the case. Talked about small variations. That happens a lot with point estimates. You're not reflecting the fact that it might be just a chance difference. And then, as I said, items are, you can't answer adequately, like knowledge of the professor, or don't provide good information, like English, or Spanish, whatever the context of the country is. Then you have non-response bias. Not everyone responds to every item, and we don't really do much about that for the most part. So we have that missing data problem going on that we leave out, and then not everyone in the class responding. And that's one of the recommendations I think both of you had about making it clear to the students the importance of the evaluation. Because a lot of students, if they don't know the importance of where it's going to go, you don't get a chance to get any feedback from it, you're probably less motivated to complete it. Especially if you are, maybe if you're at the end, you thought the class was great, or they thought the class was bad, you might be more motivated to do it because you want to express yourself, but those in the middle, often you're going to just say, you know what, I'm not going to say anything, which is unfortunate. Because you could probably learn more from those in the middle than from the extremes about how good you're teaching. Alright, so, then you've got this idea of not taking into account the demographic profile. And the study I'll briefly talk about in a few minutes, we kind of showed, as other studies, that demographic profile of your students can make a huge difference, and this is what you pointed out earlier. So in one of our studies, we looked at, we had a pretty big sample size, nearly 1,000 students, and our issue was, most instruments that we know of are top-down, which means the administrators design the instruments because they believe they know what good teaching is, what it looks like, and what should be assessed. And there's very few that starts from the bottom up, which is from the student upwards, and the students are stakeholders. They're the ones taking the courses. They should have a say, I believe, in what makes good teaching. So we, as a few other studies have done, looked at it qualitatively, started qualitatively, and asked them, college students, undergraduate, master's, doctorate students in one institution, what they think are characteristics of effective teachers. Okay, and from there, they specify some, maybe, on average they gave 3 to 4 characteristics, and from there we use qualitative analysis to come up with themes, and then from the themes we use quantitative analysis to, including things like a factor analysis, and then things like a motivator analysis to examine relationships between the themes and the demographic profile. And you can see here that there were many of the demographic variables were related to the themes that came out. Okay, in fact, there were 9 themes. So, for example, one of the themes, which is the most common theme, and it's been replicated in several studies I've done over the years with my co-authors, is student-centeredness. I don't know if it's the same in Spain, but in the US it seems student-centeredness is really an important factor. So if you're a professor who is not very student-centered, you might suffer in your evaluations. And what we found also, females were much more likely, to say that was important than males. Okay? People of color were more likely to talk about discipline than white students. So you had different findings that came from that, which showed that based on your profile. So a lot of my classes are all female because I teach in education, and oftentimes I might teach literacy or leadership, etc. So I often very used to having classes where 90%, 95%, sometimes 100% are female. So if I'm not student-centered, but effective in other ways, should I be penalized because of that? That's a question of debate, but there are ways that we can adjust, as you know, for that profile, but oftentimes we don't do that. So, and then in this same, and you mentioned it, so I'll just repeat it again, this same institution, there are several themes that emerged from the qualitative responses that tapped constructs that weren't even mentioned in the scale that they were using. So, for example, there was nothing on student-centeredness, any items on that. Okay, and so that's also a problem when we're not taking into account what our stakeholders, our students, think are the most important characteristics. Okay, even if you do have an optimal, you could design an instrument that's not optimal. That is optimal, and doesn't guarantee the interpretations are going to be optimal. So, again, if I'm not taking into account extraneous variables like whether it's required versus elective, whether it's different levels of complexity, and then that between versus within, again, the most commonsensical to me way of using these evaluations for within instructor comparisons. So looking at you over time, looking at your development, is much more informative and has a better chance of improving your teaching than between when you compare me to somebody else. That could be demotivational, especially if you think it's unfair. That you come out lower down your person, people you're competitors you're compared with. Okay, so let's put that slide there. Not factoring in, and this has been said by all three of us now, confidence intervals, effect sizes, and so forth. Also, just basic statistical concepts which get omitted when it comes to evaluation, which is making it really scary. Missing data I've talked about already. I think we reported, there's actually about 3 or 4 court rulings in the US where the faculty took the university to court and the attorney just said, oh, what's your score reliability? And when the school said, oh, we don't know it, that was it. Now you have to settle. Because if you can't show your instrument has good psychometric properties, and when somebody's suing you, that's candy for an attorney. Candy, shall I say, chocolate. So taking into account of indices, we talked about qualitative information, and there's so many of them you can have: course materials, self-evaluation, documented peer assessment, and there'll be others in another slide to come. They should be, all those students in our classes should be expected to assess what they've learned explicitly in the course, and as I said, that's why it's important to get their feedback on what they think is important. And you see some other things there, which ethics and rapport and so forth. Okay. And items should be look at specific behaviors. So we need to find out what do teachers who are effective do, and then how can we assess that? Okay. How many items do we need to assess each of those behaviors? And I love your idea of the taxonomy. That's very novel. I don't know if you published that anywhere, but you have. I need to get hold of that. That's very creative and good use of theory. And if it's for formative purposes, then of course it should be given early on in the semester. I know you had some concerns about formative versus summative earlier. If it's summative, of course, it should be towards the end, but it should not be at a time where it's necessarily high stress, the highest stress period, like just before the examination. Where possible, if you have, in the US typically, well at least from what I know, you're not supposed to be in the room when you are, as the instructor, when you're there. So you might have a student who comes in, part of the class, or somebody from your own student, graduate assistant who administers a survey, and then if you give that person a script, it's a good way to standardize it, tell them exactly what they should do, the instructions, and students should be informed what's going to happen with the ratings. And let's see what else. Score reliability, we talked about that. So these are some field and franking. I'll just say, hit some of them. Present clear information about the evaluation criteria. Educate the users of ratings to avoid misuse and abuse. Include resources for improvement. I know you talked about that. Some schools. I don't think our school has that, to my knowledge, which is unfortunate. We need to get that. Adhere to rigorous psychometric and measurement principles, and be defensible in as much as you can. But this open-endedness is really, really important. So when you include that, and some of these are very useful, some are more useful than others, to accompany your teaching. There's some debates as to whether somebody from your faculty should come into your classroom and observe you teach, in addition to your rating score. There's pros and cons of that, of course. If that's the case, it's probably better if it's a peer than it is somebody of higher ranking, because that could have all kinds of power dynamics going on. Then you have, issues of should it be videotaped, keep those as part of your portfolio. But there are many ways that you can support your teaching beyond the score, the one score. Data-driven, this is a big thing, and I don't know if you have an instrument in this, one that's validated in this institution of yours, but if you're working on it, it's something that takes time, not something you could rush, sit down and write a few items and then give it out. Something that does take time, months, if not longer, to have one that's really good, especially bearing in mind that it's going to be used to make some important decisions. And so, this idea of including the stakeholders, I like that, as I said, being the students, get that. So when you include the different, going beyond just the numbers, it opens it up to what we call mixed methods or mixed methodology, which is one of my passions, using both quantitative and qualitative, collecting both quantitative and qualitative data, analyzing it, interpreting it within the same framework. Now, going beyond that, if we think about it, we could use what's called impact evaluation. Okay, because what you're doing, you're teaching, you're bringing something into the setting, okay, and then you want to assess that intervention, which is you as you're teaching, and the effect it had on something of interest like learning, etc. Okay, so for the rest of this presentation, just going to talk a little bit about impact evaluation. So this is the model that we are developing. So it's actually in press right now in the publication, and essentially our definition of what we call the mixed method theory-based impact evaluation, this hits on the high points, is rigorous, systematic, uses quantitative and qualitative information, okay, and it's collaborative. So it's not just the hierarchy making the items, it's a collaboration. And it's measuring long-term changes as well as short-term, positive and negative or unintended consequences in the lives, in this case, of students, academic life, education lives. Okay? So qualitative and quantitative viewpoints are the essence of it, as well as some kind of theory that drives it. There are 6 broad rationales for this impact evaluation, and that's enrichment, let's put it in the next slide, enrichment, significance enhancement, treatment. The one that pertains to teaching evaluations is instrument fidelity, so because you're going to look to make sure that the instrument does what it's supposed to, that you want it to do. Okay. There's like an 8-phase, there's a framework. So first of all, you've got to understand the context, so the context of teaching. And every institution has different contexts, sadly every country has a different context. So anything that you've developed, for example, doesn't necessarily, in Belgium, doesn't necessarily relate to what's in Spain, what the value system is in Spain for teaching. So understanding the context, the construct, and then the causal chain, which goes from the teaching to the learning outcomes, or anything else of interest that you want. Then collect the data, determine the type, the level of generalizability. Does it pertain to your class, or does it go beyond your class to other classes within the institution or beyond? Conduct a rigorous evaluation of the impact, and then the process analysis. The process involved in the evaluation, then the meta-evaluation of the process and the product. Okay. So it talks about instrument fidelity for there as the rationale. So within that, you have different phases of an instrument development, of course. You know, beginning phase, and then you monitor it as you go along, and then you continue. This is another article that we had published, my colleagues and I, in Journal Mixed Method Research, where we developed phases for developing an instrument using mixed method techniques. Okay, a lot of time, development of a quantitative instrument is seen as a quantitative enterprise, but I would argue it's mixed methods and it's optimum, because at some point, let's say you wanted to develop a scale measure of intelligence, okay, and you get a score, you have your IQ scores. Well, that might seem as quantitative, but at some point in the beginning, you need to know what intelligence looks like, don't we? And how do you get that? Okay, you don't get that from quantitative. You have to observe, and again, that's going to be culturally specific and context specific. It's going to vary. For example, they say because we have a doctorate that we're supposed to be intelligent. I question that sometimes. I question that a lot of times with me, anyway. So, for example, I'm very bad with cars. Okay, very bad with cars. So when I'm driving my car and there's a noise, what do? I turn the radio up. And it's like, hey, if it goes wrong, you know, that's life, and I'm going to call whoever. And it's just to change the tire. In fact, when I put petrol or gas in my car, I thought I've really accomplished something. I thought I've done something really impressive. You know, for all of you, it's like, you know, so easy, but for me, that's quite impressive. So, and yet, many intelligence tests doesn't measure. You know, to be a car mechanic these days, you've got to be pretty smart, because the computer systems in cars now are very impressive compared to, you know, when I was a child, where I was able to open the car. Just to be able to, just the locking system is impressive. So, and yet we won't necessarily consider the mechanic as being intelligent, and yet they display a lot of skills. So, but in that context, I would say they're very intelligent. Okay. So looking at that, you know, Sternberg talks about practical intelligence versus your old-fashioned cognitive intelligence. So these are just steps you can go that you, as you're developing your instrument, of course, developing it once you've, you know, understood the context, and you can do all kinds of different things. So you could do it from qualitative, straightforward qualitative interviews, focus groups, to Delphi technique, where you've got experts, where you know, the experts help to tell you what's, like the study you talked about, the award-winning teachers, maybe you get them together and say, you know, what makes, you know, what makes good teachers, or what made you as a good teacher, or techniques that I've never seen used in this context, Q methodology, something I'm trying to promote now, where it helps to understand the, you know, you're doing the factor analysis, what's called a Q factor analysis, where you factor in the items in this case instead of the people. So any of those things play into your initial development. Once you developed it, you go on from there and you field test it. Okay. Now some people stop there, field test it. Oh, it looks okay. Now let's use it. But to go further, after the field test, you redesign it, and then you validate it using the revised instrument. There's a qualitative phase, so that'll be a traditional factor analysis and score reliability and so forth that you look at. But also qualitatively. So for example, when you have items, I'll argue this for any quantitative instrument you do, when you're developing that instrument and you give it out as a field test, you ask them to critique each item, okay? Each item as you go along. Also, then you say, is there anything that's been left out that you think that's not there among the items that you completed? And so that gives you your qualitative information for that phase 7 there that you analyze. And when we've done this for real, in fact, we had an example where we had an instrument that qualitatively seemed to be really good, had really high, had 2 factors for the spotted factor analysis, but for score reliability coefficient with a 0.96, 0.94. If you didn't have the qualitative, you say this is a great instrument, let's go. But the qualitative showed us that there were 3 important domains or themes missing from that instrument. So you had low contact relatability, low samplability that we can only get from our stakeholders. I hope that makes sense. And so adding that qualitative piece is really important. And so that yields what we call the mixed method or mixed analysis, and then you go from there. So as part of doing this, this was actually, it came out quite nicely. In just one study, one institution, I'm not generalizing to any other institution, but that institution, there were 9 themes that came out. And it's nice because they came out to respected, so responsive, enthusiastic, student-centered, and so forth, that were considered from the students to be really important. And then after factor analysis, yes, you have factor analysis theme, factor analyzed themes. As long as you have the basic requirements that you need, like sample size, adequacy, and so forth. Then you have communicator, advocate, responsible, and empowering, which spells out to care, the first 4 letters. So we have respected and care. So based on that, we are, developing this respected and care model from there, which are purple words. Then we did a follow-up study where we looked only at doctoral students. We wanted to say, okay, the doctoral students have a similar, what they deem to be important, is that similar? And it was in terms of the themes. In fact, that was replicated, which was nice, except you have a couple of them that were higher or lower than for the, so the one on the right is the doctoral students, one on the left is the regional, where it was the whole university sample. But in the factor analysis, it actually ended up having 4 meta themes that came up. There was 3. So you had synergist, enthusiast, and transformer, so which spells out to set. And so expected set. So in that case, it's showing that I'm not sure it's a good idea to have a one-size-fits-all mentality institution. That i.e. to have one instrument that you give to every student, regardless of the class, regardless of the course, regardless of the subject, regardless of the year of study, and all of those factors. And now we get into online learning, which has different, someone who does both now, different skills, different expectations. Anyone here ever taught online, taught virtually? Okay. See, it's very different, isn't it? Students want immediate feedback as soon as possible. You don't, even when I'm out of town, that's why I always like to have make sure I'm connected, because if I don't give immediate feedback within 24 hours, they start to panic, and versus, my face-to-face class that I have them every Wednesday, if I have them tomorrow night when I get back, I can just say to them, they know I'm here, so they know, okay, just be patient, they have a question, they can wait till next week. Or if they send an email, they know I'm not necessarily going to respond straight away. So that's very different population, so if it's a different population, does it make sense to give the same instrument? Or if it does, then we have to go to global instruments then that cover both. Because if you go specific, I would argue that you're going to have situations where some of the items don't fit. So that needs to be looked at. I think we could have a very big role. I did mention briefly about item response theory, but that's, we could do some things that we do in the cognitive world, item response theory, where we use 1 parameter, 2 parameter, 3 parameter, etc., and go from there to look at things like differential item functioning, the effect of that, and looking to see if we have bias. For example, if you wanted to compare classes that are taught virtually versus classes face-to-face, for the same instrument, are we going to get any kind of bias going on? So these are, some of it's been done with more the classical test theory approach as opposed to item response theory. This is what I'm working on. We're working on right now in the validation set, but doing one now based on the finding, doing one for undergraduate and masters, and the other one for doctoral students. So it's a longish process because I want to try and make sure it's useful to that university. So I'm going to stop there. I look forward to your questions for me or for the other 2 who are so much better than me. And sorry I don't have any chocolate, but